We're here with Texans General Manager Nick Caserio. Nick, we appreciate you taking the time here to
thanks
see
for
your
having
boy.
me. Really appreciate it. Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't want to sit here and start picking apart your roster and who do you like at the Senior Bowl and all that stuff. We kind of want to sit back and have a real conversation with you. And I know our audience is curious, like the day-to-day as a general manager, the scouting process and all that. So let's start with quarterback because that's where everyone wants to start. And your process with CJ Stroud and that draft class a couple years ago, where does it start? At what point did you think he might be our guy? And was there a series of actions? Was it meetings you had? Was it a certain time when you were like the light went off and you're like, hey, like this is our guy?
Sure. It's a lot there. Probably from start to finish, it's a 2 to 3 year process because what we try to do is there's going to be a cohort of juniors or underclassmen that potentially could be in a draft, whatever year that is.
Right.
So as soon as they become redshirt sophomores, juniors, once they've been in school for 3 years, or then that third year, that next year, there's an opportunity for them to be eligible. So we do pretty extensive spring scouting where we try to put together 150 to 200 prospects, go through it, scouts go through it, kind of have an initial evaluation. So, and you're really focusing on the juniors, but you're also cognizant of some of the underclassmen as well.
Yep.
So as you go through the spring, May, June, do a little bit of work, and then that fall season, you go through, scouts going to school, you're typically going to have 2 or 3 different people go through the school, area scout, over the top, college director, whether the GM or personnel director goes through there or not, but you're going to probably have 5-6 game exposures where you see the player live, and then they're also going to be accumulating information and background information on the player. So that's through the fall. And then really this time of year, I would say for underclassmen, it's going to start at the combine. That's your first opportunity, first sort of touch point. So you can interview them, you can watch them work out. We can talk about the workouts. I think everybody's got different opinions about the value of the workouts. But between the combine and then you kind of transition to the pro day, I'd say the campus visit, either you go to that player or you bring them in-house with your coaches and on your campus, that's another opportunity for you. So I would say we did, specific to CJ, not just him, but other quarterbacks and other players. We've done that with a lot of players, but CJ was in our building, talked to him at the combine, had him in the building, and then just kind of kept going through the process. And what we're trying to do is accumulate as much information as possible, create a profile and a picture of the player and say, all right, in the end, here's what we're getting when this player walks in, and we're comfortable or not comfortable. And I'd say by the end of kind of March, beginning April, I think we had a pretty good idea about, and coaches get involved typically a little bit later in that process, right? So you want to make sure all the people involved, from D'Amico to the offensive coordinator, the quarterback coach, they have their opportunity. And at some point, we all have to get together and say, all right, what do we see? How do we feel? And then if we have to make a decision, be prepared to make a decision with all the information available.
So you found your guy. And obviously he has an unbelievable rookie season this year. Every quarterback has some challenges, some bumps and bruises. The experience helps in terms of his growth. But you have your guy, right? And there's a lot of teams out there that would love to be in your position. That's the positive. The negative, as I just sit back from the outside looking in, is, oh shit, we're in a division with, or a conference, I should say, just the conference with Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, the list keeps going, Lamar Jackson. So there's such a thin margin of error and trying to build this roster. I guess my first question with that as the backdrop is, how do you best support your quarterback when you know you've got him?
Yeah, it's another great question. And I would say you just reeled off the quarterbacks that are in the AFC specifically. And it's the best play. This is what makes our league is competitive, more competitive than any league that's out there, because the margins are so small and we only play once a week. But as far as how we try to approach it, it's about the team composition and team structure, not necessarily geared toward one specific player. You want to make sure that you have enough assets and you have enough, I would say, support around the player and a quarterback, but you got to have a decent group of skill players, you got to have a decent offensive line, there's a scheme element. How do you play on defense? The kicking game factors in. So we try to take a holistic approach, kind of top to bottom. Let's build as good of a team as possible, because certain weeks the offense is going to have to carry us. Other weeks the defense is going to have to carry us. We're going to make a play in a kicking game. And in the end, it's about how do you execute in most critical situations. When you watch, we go back and watch the championship games this weekend. It was all there right in front of you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, other than Patrick, every quarterback is going to go through some ups and downs to get to a point where you get to the championship game, and then if you're fortunate enough to win that game, then you have an opportunity to play in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, so you look at any industry, right, and you can find talent. The good companies, no matter what field they're in, find talented people. They can find productive people. They can find experienced people. But I think what sets the great ones apart is finding the right people. And how do you go through that process? How does that process look for you?
It's not easy. You have to be very disciplined, and you have to be very committed to, if you're saying, these are the things that we're going to prioritize and are important, not so much the physical, but off the field in terms of their competitiveness,
right,
in terms of their mental and physical toughness, in terms of their mental aptitude, in terms of the type of person they are, and are they a good teammate. If those are the things that are important, you have to prioritize those as a part of your process. If you stray from that just to take a player or somebody that maybe is more talented but doesn't fit your culture, then you're taking some risk. So that's where I think D'Amico and I are aligned from the standpoint of, this is what we want, we're going to prioritize it. And I would say you take a vast number of players and we'll shrink them down into, here are the players that we feel fit that profile for the Houston Texans. And that might mean you're going to pass on a player, but if you're staying true and committed and disciplined to really what you're trying to build, then if you believe in that, then you go ahead and move forward with it.
Over the course of your career, is there maybe one player, maybe two players that like stood out to you during that process of that they really set themselves apart, maybe in the interviews, the way that other people talked about them?
It's hard to allude, but I would just say input from other players at their particular school always is interesting information, because if you start to see a pattern of behavior, so if you talk to 5 different players at one school and they might say, well, this specific, they keep coming back to you, have to pick one player or who's a player you want to build a team with, and they keep coming back to this particular player, then part of our job is to say, all right, wait a minute, like, let's just go back and make sure, verify our information, because obviously if everybody's saying this, like, this is a player that you want to have on your team. So I might have been fortunate to be around a lot of good players and a lot of good teams in my time in New England. And I would say a number of players, I mean, that are on our team currently. I think, Jalen Petrie was a player that like everybody felt that way about him coming out. And when you look at kind of what he had to endure at Baylor, the program wasn't very good.
Right.
I mean, they were basically starting at ground zero, and everybody that you spoke with said he was a big reason why, him and Bernard, which, when you watch those two players play now in Buffalo, you watch those two players that have a significant impact on their team. So I would say that's probably an example most recently of my time in Houston as we were just getting started, because Jalen was a player that we took, I want to say that was the second year that I was there, then a first or second round pick in the first year. So we were looking at a different pool of players. But then Petrie was a player, and I'd say everything that Baylor had talked about and his impact on the program, he's had as big of an impact, if not more, on our program as we're starting to piece this together.
Specifically looking at your roster now, but you've got free agency coming up. You have to do the self-evaluation process. We were talking about that a little bit before, figuring out, all right, here's our areas of strength. These are the players that we believe in, that we're going to have to spend to bring back. Here's some spots we may have to, unfortunately, move on from. What are the priorities for the Texans this year in the offseason with free agency and the draft, the areas where you're looking to say, all right, if we're going to take that next step, from a personnel standpoint, we've got to improve in what areas?
Yeah, certain areas we have more players under contract than we do others. I mean, offensively, most of our skill players are under contract. Yep. Most of our offensive linemen are under contract. So I'd say that's a position, or as a group, we're just going to try to find good football players and add them to the team. It's no different on defense. We just have a few more players on defense whose contracts are set to expire here in March or in a few weeks, however many weeks that is. So there'll be some players that we're going to want to bring back. They might choose to go elsewhere. So we have to, that's where the free agent process, we're starting to go through. I know we're here at the Senior Bowl, but our pro scouting staff is going through free agent meetings and starting to go through their process of identifying players who fits, who do we have a realistic opportunity to get, and then you have to factor in the cost. So philosophically, good football players, regardless of position, and then we'll figure out how they best fit. So we don't take the approach, well, we need to have this, let's go find that. Well, let's understand the market. Let's understand multiple positions, make sure we know the players, and then figure out if there's an opportunity to add that player to the team, does it make sense or not?
I've never worked for Bill Belichick, right? But I've got a handful of friends that have, and it is my understanding, one of the most rewarding experiences from a football standpoint that you could have, but also challenging. what was the hardest lesson you ever learned from Bill? Maybe a story or something like. When you look back at your time with Bill, is there one story that stands out, or one thing you learned like that really jumps out to you?
Yeah, I was fortunate to be around him for 20 years.
Yeah.
And he and I worked together on a number of different levels, and I kind of was able to get exposure to a number of different facets of the football operation. The thing that I really took from him was his constant ability to adjust and adapt. And I would say either move on from players, even if it was maybe not the most popular thing to do, but make the decisions that are always in the best interest of the team, and always kind of, you're focused on the present, but think ahead a little bit, and to just be able to adjust and adapt, whether it's schematically, whether it's what you're looking for in personnel. I'd say that was I learned 1,000 things from him, but like that, his ability to kind of adjust and adapt kind of on the fly was something that not too many people can do. And as we kind of shifted defensively there, it's kind of like right around 2008, 9, 10, we kind of shifted a little bit, when we started playing a little more nickel defense before the rest of the league, and kind of using Chung in this kind of hybrid safety linebacker role.
Right.
So you're playing nickel defense from your base calls, but playing nickel out of it. So it kind of looks the same to the offense, but it's just a little subtle difference. So I think his ability to kind of be willing to change and adjust and adapt, and we did that offensively a number of times as well. So how we played one year, we were predominantly an 11 personnel team in 2007. And then when we had the 2 tight ends, we became a little bit more of a 12 personnel team. And then you're playing a cat and mouse game. Is it base defense? Is it nickel defense? So the ability to kind of like bob and weave and adjust and adapt. And I would just echo those sentiments. Some of the most rewarding time is very challenging and very taxing mentally, but he always allowed you to do your job and provide him information and provide your perspective. And he was a phenomenal listener. So I think the ability to adjust and adapt and then listen and utilize all the resources in your building, I think is something that we've tried to apply. I've tried to apply a little bit here in Houston.
Just listening to that story, it kind of strikes me how integrated the personnel part was with the coaching staff. And obviously Bill was a little bit unique in his role in the organization, kind of in control of all of that. But with D'Amico Ryans and the coaching staff and the involvement, we talked to a bunch of different GMs and we talked to different coaches and scouts, and it seems to be different in a lot of different teams in terms of the involvement and all of that. How much of the communication goes on? Obviously, this time of year, the coaching kind of comes to a halt, and now they get involved in the scouting process. But how much do you guys work together? And then at the end of the day, obviously, you have to make decisions. But how important is that for you guys compared to maybe some other places? Significantly.
I think we have a very good synergy. We communicate a lot, and I think we're very respectful of one another. D'Amico's like incredible human being. He's a phenomenal coach, but he's an incredible human being. And I think he has a unique perspective. And I've always viewed my role, even when I was working with Coach Belichick, it was a supporting role. So my job is to help support the head coach. And because of my background, that synergy between coaching and scouting and personnel kind of was able to lend a little different perspective. So we want the input of the coaches. They're intimately involved. What we try to do is pare it down and say, here, focus on this cohort of players. Go ahead and go through your evaluations. Then we meet as a staff, and they give their input and perspective. Here's the role. Here's how we see the player. And then we take that information. And again, we're trying to make a decision that collectively is in the best interest of our team. Not it's D'Amico's pick, it's Nick's pick, it's the Houston Texans pick. And we all have to have conviction and belief. And there's going to be times we disagree. And if we disagree, maybe we shift our attitude and efforts to another player, and that's okay. In the end, whatever decision we make, we're making it in unison, and then we're moving forward, and then we're going to figure out a way to make it work.
The advancement of technology is always kind of this debated aspect, like, keep them out of the football, they don't know football, but I'll just ask a question because I have my own thoughts on it. But for you, the advancement of technology with scouting and the evaluation process and just the efficiency of work, how important has that been? What have you found to be most helpful for you?
Yeah, the advances in the video technology have probably been more pronounced than anything. I mean, when I started, I was beta tape, and you were time coding, and you were trying to do 5 or 6 players, so you'd have to go through the whole game. You have a sheet of paper, and you're time coding, and then you're building a highlight tape. Well, now, in most teams' database, you can go to a specific player if you want to just watch all his catches. you're able to click and populate those. So from a time perspective, from efficiency of available information, that's where technology has been advantageous. From a technology relative to data and other analytics, whatever you want to call it, it's really more a tool and it's information. And then you just have to be able to synthesize it and say, what's the application? What is this information telling us? And then how do we apply it? So the big thing I would say from my perspective specifically is the video component and the technology to be able to get to something quickly. If you want to watch all his pressures, right? You're able to pull up all those players' 60 pressures and watch them. You can say, all right, who's it against? Who's the player? So it just makes it a lot quicker as opposed to got to go through the game. All right, let's figure out when the pressures took place. Not that you're just looking for a highlight tape. So I would say just the efficiency and availability, and you can do it. You don't necessarily have to be chained to your desk to do it. Like if you have an office set up at home, you can flip your computer out like we're doing here with this podcast and do the same amount of work. So, and I think we all have to be sensitive to there's a balance. Like a lot of us have families, a lot of us have children. We're focused on our work and we care a lot about our work, but we've found there's alternative ways to get your work done. So I would say that's only going to continue to grow, but you want to be careful of not just doing something just to do it.
Right.
I'm guessing there's a handful of people, hopefully a lot more than a handful, that aspire to be a scout one day or a general manager or just have a love for football and are curious. If you could go back and think about yourself for a minute as a young Nick, right, and just getting into scouting, what's the one thing you would tell him now with all the knowledge and experience that you have?
Yeah, and when I had no idea what scouting was when I started in the NFL. And I was coaching in college. I was a graduate assistant. I thought, I'm going to coach. Like that was going to be the career path. And then the opportunity came up in New England as a scouting assistant. I was like, what's a scouting assistant? So I think it's just embrace the moment, try to work as hard as you possibly can, and be very observant and curious, and don't be afraid to ask questions. And don't get so bogged down with something and think, well, it's the end of the world if you evaluated the player maybe differently than somebody else. Because sometimes you try to shoehorn something into what you think people want to hear.
Yes.
I went through that, and that was probably one of the things I had to learn is, you know what? Believe in what you're seeing, believe in yourself, have some conviction, present it in a respectful way. And if somebody disagrees with you or they see it differently, that's okay. Then you can go back and learn what did I miss.
That can be a good thing too, right?
Exactly. So that's part of growth. Sometimes growth is in those moments where it's pretty difficult. So, and I would say work is work, but be smart about your work. I mean, I have some stories that I won't share here, but where I injured myself because I just didn't get enough sleep.
Yeah.
You know, you're walking around so that's not worth it.
No.
So in the end, it's not worth it. So work smart, have conviction, be respectful, listen, maintain your curiosity, and just try to learn as much as you can.
Yeah, well, you were in New England. You did bounce. You were a scouting assistant, a scout, and then you coached again. So you were still willing to go back to do that. And obviously, you know, it sounds like you hit on it a little bit. Could you talk about doing that, the coaching, and how that makes you relate to not only just D'Amico, but maybe some of the assistant coaches who have feelings about certain players, what they might want to look for in what they do?
Yeah, it just have a unique perspective. Right. So started as a scouting assistant, then did quality control work over specifically, I was the offensive quality control coach for Coach Weiss and the group there. Then I flipped to college.
Right.
Then in 2007, I went back downstairs and, you know, I was coaching arguably some of the best receivers in the league. When one's in the Hall of Fame, or I'm pretty sure Randy's in the Hall of Fame. But
should be.
We had Randy, we had Wes, we had Dante Stallworth, we had Jabbar Gaffney, Troy Brown was coming back, Kelly Washington. So here I am, a 20-something or however old I was at the time. I'm not going to really tell these guys something that they don't really know. Right. So I just tried to say, provide them information that's useful, because I think the one thing that you do find is that players have an appetite for learning and they want to be coached. So if you can provide them something that can help them on Sunday, then they're going to listen. Mm-hmm. So I think now being kind of back on the other side of it, it's just, all right, are the coaches doing that? Are they providing the players with the information? Are they able to absorb that information? So they're able to handle it? So how much can they handle mentally? That's part of our scouting, their mental capacity. Can they, well, you know what, this guy has a little bit of trouble learning, whatever it is. So there's a constant overlay and back and forth. And I try to just maintain my space and distance. And if someone asks me a question for something schematically or something, I can provide my perspective on it. But I think the ability to kind of go back and forth is it gives you a big picture perspective, because in the end, it's all interconnected.
Right.
So we're not just scouting players and they're not just coaching players. You're trying to build a football team, and you want to make sure they're identifying the right traits and characteristics that go into being a winning football player.
So do you ask members of your own staff to have that kind of versatility and that openness? Do you expose them to different opportunities?
If they're interested, you typically won't see a lot of scouts kind of go into coaching.
Right. It's unique.
You might see some coaches go into scouting, I would say, and not all coaches can scout. Not all scouts can coach. Some can do both. I think really more in personnel, you might have more crossover, college to pro, pro to college,
Right.
and get them cross-trained so that when you're evaluating college players, if you don't understand what's playing in the league, sometimes there's misconception about what's actually playing on Sundays. So you're kind of have a jaded view because you're focused solely on college. It's like, well, this guy's this, but wait a minute. Do you have a true understanding of what's playing in the league? So we try to do is cross-train them a little bit in some of those areas so they have a good perspective of what's actually playing in the league, so that can help them when they're on the road in the fall.
Last one for me. There's only 32 of you in the world, right? And I think we, from the outside looking in, can understand that massive challenges and time constraints and balancing and juggling all these things. But like from a day-to-day, obviously the winning is the best part. From a day-to-day perspective, when you just kind of sit back and think like, this is the best part of my day. When you get to do this for 5 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, what is your favorite part of the job still?
I'm a very process-oriented person.
Okay.
So during the course of the week, certain checkpoints as you're going through, and I try to each week evaluate the upcoming opponent so that at the end of the season, we're ready for free agency. So it's not like, well, I have a coding system where I'm able to go and say, okay, this guy's an unrestricted free agent, he's a restricted free agent at the end of the year. Okay, a lot of the work has been done. So to be able to kind of stay on track and stay on schedule and just keep pressing forward, and then being able to kind of turn the page regardless of what happens on Sunday, win or lose, like you have to do that in this league. It's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
Sometimes we kind of get caught up in winning. Sometimes we get too low when we're losing. But I try to maintain some level of civility and consistency and level-headedness so I can just focus on the work that's in front of me, because in the end, it's all about the work. So we can talk about a lot of different things, but I'd say the joy is found in the work for me. I enjoy work. I try to work out 5 or 6 times a week.
Yep.
It's kind of my release. I like to read during the season just to kind of get my mind away from football. So I think all of us have to have some outlets that kind of can keep the mind fresh, so that when we're working, that we're rejuvenated and we're focused.
Interesting. We appreciate your time, man.
No, I appreciate it. I enjoyed the
good
conversation.
stuff.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you bet.